Buenos días a todos, bienvenidos. Damos inicio entonces al tercer día de América Sostenible. Hemos llegado ya al final de nuestro programa y estamos muy emocionados por los resultados obtenidos. La agenda de hoy, la verdad que está bastante completa. Todavía tenemos varias conferencias, varios paneles con expertos de primer nivel, así que los invitamos a acompañarnos el resto del programa del día de hoy. Vamos a arrancar con nuestra plenaria, no sin antes tener unas palabras por parte de la embajadora de Canadá en Guatemala, la señora Rita Rudatis Renaud.
Buenos días a todos. Les saluda Rita Rudatis Renaud, embajadora de Canadá en Guatemala. Estamos ya en el tercer y último día de este gran evento, América Sostenible, en donde han tenido la oportunidad de entender, compartir y hacer negocios y enlaces en un tema tan relevante en este tiempo, la construcción sostenible. Este año ha cambiado nuestras vidas, nuestra forma de relacionarnos, nuestra forma de trabajar y vivir. Este evento, en formato virtual, es una muestra de cómo nos hemos tenido que adaptar. Ahora, más que nunca, debemos poner mayor atención a cómo planificamos y construimos nuestras ciudades, con proyectos transformadores orientados a los ciudadanos, al medio ambiente, al desarrollo económico, social y cultural de las personas. Hoy tengo el gusto de presentarles a dos expertos, Brostrom y Juan Monterrosa, que han trabajado en la Municipalidad de Edmonton liderando políticas, acciones y estrategias de largo plazo para contribuir a la construcción de una ciudad resiliente, adaptable al cambio climático y con un enfoque en el desarrollo social y económico para sus ciudadanos. La Ciudad de Edmonton está ubicada en la provincia de Alberta y es reconocida a nivel mundial por su industria petrolera y que le ha permitido tener un crecimiento económico constante. La Ciudad de Edmonton tiene múltiples atractivos, cuenta con el Centro Francis Winspear para la música, reconocido como uno de los centros culturales con una acústica perfecta y es sede la Orquesta Sinfónica de Edmonton. Otro atractivo importante de esta hermosa ciudad es que se encuentra el centro comercial más grande de Norteamérica, con 490,000 metros cuadrados de construcción. Incluye el parque acuático en su interior, el segundo más grande del mundo. Pero además de esta pequeña introducción a la plenaria de hoy, aprovechar la oportunidad para felicitar al Consejo de Construcción Sostenible por su 10º aniversario y por la organización de este importante evento. La Embajada de Canadá ha sido testigo de estos 10 años de crecimiento y hemos sido aliados de esta organización, quienes son verdaderos ejemplos de cambio y han afectado positivamente al sector de construcción en Guatemala y la región. Así que, sin más, agradezco a todos por su participación a este importante evento y espero puedan aprender y aplicar muchas de las prácticas sostenibles que la ciudad de Edmonton les estará compartiendo
Agradecemos profundamente el apoyo que hemos recibido siempre por parte de la Embajada de Canadá, hoy como coorganizadores de este evento a nivel regional, especialmente a Jennifer Chacón y a la Oficina Comercial de la Embajada de Canadá, que siempre han sido sus aliados estratégicos, que el Guatemala Green Building Council ha podido contar con ellos a lo largo de estos 10 años. Así que muchísimas gracias. Vamos a arrancar entonces con el programa del día de hoy. Tenemos una plenaria, la verdad, de primer nivel. Tenemos esta presentación sobre el rol de la construcción sostenible en la transición energética de las ciudades. Esto va a ser presentado por parte de la Municipalidad de Edmonton en Alberta, Canadá. Para Guatemala, la verdad que Canadá ha sido siempre un ejemplo a seguir. Canadá ha liderado estrategias de sostenibilidad en el espacio construido desde siempre y pues nos aventaja muchísimo tenerlos como aliados, como un GBC también hermano de la región de las Américas, del cual siempre podemos aprender y compartir experiencias, y pues hoy es una de estas oportunidades donde vamos a contar con Brostrom y Juan Monterrosa, ambos del equipo de la Municipalidad de Edmonton de la provincia de Alberta en Canadá. Quiero contarles que Brostrom es ingeniero mecánico, actualmente es el director de estrategias de sostenibilidad de la ciudad de Edmonton. Desde 1990 ha trabajado en los programas de políticas ambientales y energéticas. Ahora lidera la transición energética y la estrategia de adaptación y resiliencia de la ciudad de Edmonton. Ha sido nombrado como Energy Future Lab Fellow por parte de la provincia de Alberta. Además, es parte del Alberta Water Council. En 2010 recibió el premio a la excelencia de la Sustainable Community de Alberta y en 2013 recibió la medalla Queen's Diamond por su larga trayectoria y compromiso en los avances de sostenibilidad de la Municipalidad de Edmonton. Para nosotros es un verdadero honor contar con Mark el día de hoy en este evento. También nos acompaña Juan Monterrosa. Juan es ingeniero acreditado LEED AP y además es consultor Passive House. Actualmente es el director de códigos de seguridad, permisos e inspecciones de la ciudad de Edmonton. Tuvo a su cargo la implementación del código de energía para las edificaciones, fungiendo como el encargado de que los planes y políticas sean llevados a la realidad. Juan lidera a la ciudad de Edmonton en el alcance de la meta trazada que para el año 2030 todas las edificaciones de Canadá alcancen ser neto cero carbono. Como les digo, Canadá pues es sin duda un líder en la transformación energética de las ciudades y pues qué mejor manera de que aprendamos y que contemos con la experiencia contada desde los que son los protagonistas y quienes están haciendo que esto sea posible en Canadá. Así que sin más, les dejo con Mark y Juan Monterrosa. Voy a dejar de compartir mi pantalla para que ellos puedan compartir la suya. Welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining us today. I give you the stage is all yours. Welcome.
Well, buenos dias, good morning. And I'm going to start with a little bit of a context of the city of Edmonton and talk a little bit about the context of energy transition and our climate work. And then Juan is going to take a deeper dive into the green building side of things, which will be the exciting and I think the work that everybody's here to see. So Edmonton is located in Western Canada. We're about 300 kilometers to the west is the Rockies. We have fertile farmland south and east of us, and boreal forest to the north. We're a northern city at 53 degrees latitude. There's about 980,000 people living in Edmonton today in a regional population of about 1.4 million. And Google Maps tells me that we are about 6,000 kilometers between Edmonton and Guatemala City. And that's about a 65-hour drive, according to them, or a 49-day walk. That's, of course, if you're walking 24 hours a day. So next slide here. The Edmonton area and the province of Alberta are blessed with an abundance of natural resources. While European settlers have been here a little over 200 years, Indigenous peoples have settled in the Edmonton area since about 3,000 years BC, and perhaps as early as 12,000 years BC, when the ice-free corridor opened up after the last glacial ice period, and opened up the area for timber, water, wildlife, and that became available in the region for those that were around at that time. And more recently, oil and gas, and of course the oil sands, showed here up in the Fort McMurray area, have fueled growth in the province. And while Edmonton's economy is diverse, much of the recent growth has been dependent on the fossil fuel industry. So next. So with that little bit of context of Edmonton, I'm going to jump into the policy context around our energy transition and our sustainable green buildings portion here. I've got here a picture of Edmonton City Hall, where all of the political action does happen. Next. While the city of Edmonton has been involved in greenhouse gas emission reductions and the climate file since early in the 1990s, our most comprehensive strategy and action plan was approved in 2015, which includes a 35% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. In 2018, Edmonton hosted the inaugural city's IPCC conference, where the role of cities in addressing the climate issue was internationally strengthened. The Edmonton Declaration that came out of that conference, with the commitment to limit global warming, or global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees, aligned with the IPCC Paris Declaration. In 2019, Edmonton City Council declared a climate emergency and directed administration to update the energy transition strategy to stay within, or to keep Edmonton, the Edmonton community within a carbon budget. I will discuss that a little bit further in a couple of slides. Next slide. We believe that the key to the success of any climate strategy or climate work is the use of a climate lens for all of the decisions and the work that the city does. Connect Edmonton City Council's strategic plan has climate resilience as one of its 4 strategic goals. Our recently approved municipal development plan, called City Plan, identifies staying within the carbon budget as a target. And with COVID changing everything, we are in the process of reimagining our city with the intention of a green recovery. Next slide. So here's a breakdown of our greenhouse gas emissions and where they're coming from in the Edmonton community. As you can see, industry has a big piece of it, transportation, of course, and our commercial and institutional buildings, as well as our residential buildings, are the other third of the pie. So a big chunk of the puzzle that we have to deal with. Next slide. So our carbon budget is the total amount of CO2 that we can emit by 2050 that is allocated to the city of Edmonton in order to have a future with a stable global climate system. I could get into a whole lot of discussion on the budget itself and how we got to that, but that's probably a presentation on its own. But you can see by this curve, we know that our work is cut out for us to achieve these significant reductions in carbon emissions. To get to and stay below the lower curve is going to take innovation, ingenuity, and significant social change. Next slide. And again, to put this in context, these changes need to happen on the ground and not just on the chart. And you can see a picture of the city and the buildings, our transportation systems, all of this has to occur, as I say, on the ground. Next slide. So our work, we've broken that down into 5 focus areas. We have a focus area on renewable energy, looking at such things as wind and solar. A focus area on building an efficient city that has more active transportation, better public transportation, and electrification of all vehicles. Another focus area is around carbon capture and nature-based solutions, which includes geological storage of carbon and enhancing the storage in our trees and our soils. And another focus area being the city leadership, looking at our own buildings, our fleets, our streetlights that we own and operate, and looking to make sure that we're leading in those areas. Next slide. So here's a slightly different look at our emissions profile. This is a slide of where we're hoping to get our emission reductions, and this is where we identify the pieces of the puzzle that we need to put together, and the 20% reduction that we're going and looking for from the emission neutral building side, which is where I'm going to turn it over to Juan. The show is yours, Juan.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so thanks, Mark. So what we are looking at from our end right now, and what I'm going to be focusing on, is the emission neutral building piece, and what it's how we transform our industry. And as Mark was saying, you know, we come from a province that has been rich in natural resources. You know, we're known for our oil sands, we're known for oil and gas, but as we're going through and diversifying our economy, it's looking at how do we look at energy differently. We are a very energy dependent economy, and I think, you know, what that means for us is that we understand energy. So being able to go through that and see like how we use energy differently is how we look at, you know, using the skills that our province has and using them differently to diversify. So I'll go into a little bit of that as well, and a little bit into how we're looking at this path as part of the 1.5 degree work that Mark is doing. So for emission neutral building, there's three things there. So it's emission neutral buildings, the buildings themselves. There's addressing energy poverty and catalyzing local green building and energy efficiency industry. So the first one in terms of building is, let's stop building bad buildings. So let's go through and start upping the minimum energy efficiency that we have for buildings right now. And I'll go into that a little bit in terms of how the building code right now speaks to that. But then once we get, you know, we're done doing all the bad buildings, we have to look at all the ones that, you know, are quote unquote bad, the retrofits, and looking at all these buildings that were built without an energy code, that didn't really take energy efficiency into account. Our energy code didn't come into effect until 2016. So, you know, we are a little bit behind from some other municipalities in Canada. So we're right in the middle of transforming. And then to add on top of that, so we're talking about just energy at first, then you look at the embodied carbon and what it takes to build these buildings when it comes to the construction, like the kind of concrete that we're using, the kind of additives that go in that. You know, there's some coal additives that go in concrete. So how do we reduce some of the GHGs in that? Then we talk about energy poverty. It's how do we make sure this is equitable and that everybody has access to a high performing building, not just those that are able to pay for it, but make it so as, you know, energy prices go up, that people aren't in houses that aren't performing as well as some of the more high performance buildings that we're seeing that are being built. And the last piece is kind of what I introduced with is, how do we look at the training that we have within our province? So we have two really amazing technical schools that you know, train carpenters, electricians, plumbers, gas fitters, HVAC consultants to go out and build these things. So how do we kind of look at that differently and move towards a more high performance and a low carbon future? So this is emissions neutral. Like one of the things that we talk about when we go through this is there's many different ways to define what emission neutral is. From our end, what we are looking at specifically at the beginning of one of the projects I'm going to be talking about today is the renewable energy and the operational energy. So, you know, net zero, we've been talking about it for a long time, is, you know, make as much renewable energy as you consume, but you're still, you know, you could in theory still consume a lot of energy and just replace it with renewable. So you're not totally reducing the total carbon output of that. So that's the direction that we're going with this is focusing on that top piece. And as I mentioned, there's a retrofit, and then there's the construction piece of that as well. There's a carbon storage. So there's a lot of different things when it comes into the accounting of it. And like Mark was saying, we could go into this a lot in terms of the modeling. And I'll be talking a little bit about the modeling here as well that Mark's team performed. But when we're talking about those emission neutral buildings, it is how much energy are they consuming? What is the total carbon output of that energy? And then how do we go through and make sure we offset that with whether it be on-site renewables or if they are off-site, and we're talking more in theory of the grid and how less carbon heavy the grid is. And again, I'll get into that as well, because that's one of the things that we have here in Alberta is that our grid is pretty coal dominant. Through obviously Central America with SAPAC, with how the grid is set up there. It's, everybody has kind of like different ways of how they're generating electricity. And my family's from El Salvador, so it's, when I go down there, I see like the geothermal systems that are there. That's providing a lot of the electricity there. But there's also still coal. There's hydro, and then how do we start looking at solar as well? In Edmonton, we are pretty lucky that we have a really high solar potential, like higher than Germany, higher than some places they see in Europe. So the amount of sun that we can actually harvest in Alberta is actually quite amazing. So if we're able to go off of that and put investment into that, that eventually goes into our entire grid system, and it helps our buildings as well. One thing that helps out on our end in Canada is the Canadian Green Building Council came out with a zero carbon building standard. So it's in version 2 now. The pilot came out, there's a bunch of buildings that went through it. And what zero carbon means through the CAGBC is kind of what we're talking about. It's the embodied carbon. So how much carbon went into building the building. There's the operational carbon. So direct emissions and indirect emissions based on how that building is operating. And then the avoided emissions. So a certain amount of carbon offsets, or if they exported green power to offset that. So there's 2 different ways to look at it through the CAGBC. There's the design portion, which is this. And then there's like the years after of showing that you still are carbon neutral when it comes to that energy piece, and showing that year's worth of data. I'm sure as everybody's aware, it's like one of the things that criticisms of LEED is that, what happens after the fact. And, we have LEED for new construction, we have LEED existing buildings, but how is it that we're consistently tracking that and showing what the total energy use and the carbon emissions with that is as well. So this is some of the modeling that Mark's team put together, and I always find this really interesting because it goes and it stacks up all the different things we have to do as a city to get close to our goal here. And there's a lot. If you look at all the different colors there, and you see all the different things you have to be doing. There's a lot of work that we have to do, and like Mark is a very busy guy, and he's going through and he has a lot of work to be done over the next 30 years. So the one thing that we focus on within our project are the ones that we have circled here. So there's the installation of heat pumps. I'm just going to show these here. So you can see heat pumps is how do we electrify our buildings. We use a lot of furnace here. It gets really cold here. So we use natural gas to heat our houses. And our winter season started already. It's -10 here today. And we start hearing people starting to run their heating units. So if we're using natural gas, we switch over to heat pumps, but our grid is actually pretty dirty because it's coal. So then we have to make sure that the amount of electricity and that efficiency that we're getting is being offset with either renewables or eventually the grid getting cleaner. There's a new commercial. So just in general, how much more new commercial buildings we're going to have. There's existing commercial. You can see there's a big chunk there. How do we start addressing those buildings? Because those are the ones that are just there, and we have to go back and fix, New residential, a lot of single family homes here. And there's a big chunk of that still left. You can see that compared to the existing residential, they're pretty similar. So if we start focusing on that new residential, we take a big chunk out of this and then kind of start looking at the existing residential, which is a little bit obviously easier in some cases, depending on how you look at it. If you're just kind of putting solar panels on it to help it out, is one way. But then there's everything else that goes into that. And you can see the renewable natural gas is one big chunk here. And so that's going back to like, what are we doing with our grids? How are we going through it and heating our buildings? If we're still using gas or using renewable gas, there's solar here that comes in as well. There's wind, there's energy storage, decreased waste reduction. So it's a lot of different things. And buildings is that one piece as Mark showed from the beginning. So for those that might be familiar with this, the way that we're looking at our projects is first, it's like a pyramid, and start from the bottom and just reduce the total amount of energy that a building needs anyways. More insulation, how we place our buildings to make sure we have the proper solar access to get indirect heating in the wintertime, making sure we have the right kind of canopies so we don't get that heating in the summertime, so we don't need air conditioning. Yes, we do have air conditioning here. It doesn't obviously get as hot as it does in Central America and Latin America, but it is getting warmer here. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing with new houses is that more people are installing air conditioners and obviously increasing the amount of carbon emissions with that. So once we like look at the building itself without losing heat or like bringing in heat in the summertime, then we look at our systems. Let's we look at those heat pumps. We look at our air conditioners. Can we make those more efficient? Our furnaces, everything. How do we make our mechanical systems more efficient then after we've solved like just the heat loss? And once we do all that, then we add the renewables. And this is more on the case when we're looking at new buildings. On existing buildings, you could start with the renewables right away and totally offset your emissions if the cost associated with those other two is quite high. And I'll touch a little bit on that as well. So, we say walk the talk. So we're trying to speak to all of the emissions in the city of Edmonton, in the community. But what are we doing as a city ourselves? And as a city ourselves, we have our own policies. And our policies, there's a C532, it's called. It's just a number. And the way that we started off 4 years ago is 40-40-80. So 40% more efficient than the National Energy Code, 40% less greenhouse gas emissions than the National Building Code, Energy Code, and then 80% TEDI, or annual heating demand, so the amount of heat that's lost. So this is one of the fire halls that is going through our process. So this is a net zero fire hall here in City of Edmonton that's in design. Super insulated. The doors are pretty insulated as well, and you can see there's kind of like that curve up there that allows for all that solar panels to be up there. So from our end, we're looking at what can we do within ourselves to go through and show that this can be done, and obviously make sure that it is cost effective, right? Because at the end of the day, we're responsible with how we're using taxpayer dollars and show that there is a payback with this. And I think that's one of the things that we don't typically think about a lot is the operational portion of our sustainable buildings. So for this project, we brought on a consultant, and this was their energy modeling. It was pretty amazing. So you go through and kind of change what your R values are, what your window to wall ratio is, what your window insulation values are, your solar heat gain coefficients. All these, you kind of put them into different layers, and then it gives you, these are the outputs. So it tells us what the output is, the total energy use intensity, the total annual heating demand, so how much heat it's losing, the savings over code. And so as we would go through, we would kind of check these boxes here and move them here. And as we like changed each of these, it would tell us what our different inputs could be. So it's really high level design advice, but it gave us at least where to start from. So we start thinking about what that cost is. And you can see as we get into it, we look at what the net present value, factor is, what the initial cost is. So we're thinking of all these things as we go through our own projects to hopefully help industry understand like what level of detail you have to go into to fully like change the way that you build. And I think that's one of the things we're talking about transforming. And so we talk about transforming, there's always three groups of builders, of developers. There's the, there's the leaders that are usually here in energy efficiency. There's kind of everybody else that's in the middle, and then there are the laggards. And so this is how we're trying to kind of move our industry forward. So, they have market position, they respond to rebates, they see the opportunity, so they take all that and they keep on using it. Like, there's money here, I know how to do this, and so I can probably do it for cheaper as I go in and fully understand it. Like I said, you have those that respond to the minimums, basic code, just whatever the minimum code is, that's all I'm going to do, and I'm not going to put any additional effort into innovating, essentially. So how do we move them? One way is to, provide incentives. Sorry, one way is to, oops, I did it wrong here. So one way is to go through and push everybody forward. So that's regulation. So you push regulation and everybody kind of like gets moved a little bit, but that volume goes up. And so what you have is there's just less people that are doing that certain portion that is the minimum. And then there's everybody kind of in the middle gets pushed up. So there's a lot more of them there. And then with pure regulation, those leaders, you're still kind of minimizing those also. And then if you go with just incentives, then you're just really just pulling out all those leaders further and pulling everybody else back down, because those at the end, they don't really see the incentive for them to, or it's not big enough for them to go through and do that work. So you get a lot more of those there, a lot in middle ground in terms of like the amount of your regular projects, and then you're kind of pulling out everybody else in terms of the incentive piece on that leadership end. So what we look at is like using both. So making sure we keep that same amount of projects there and that same amount of building. So we give the incentives to pull everybody out, and then we do the regulation to kind of push everybody. So that kind of pull and push really gives us to keep the economic development portion of it going, so that people can still build based on it. So there's that minimum, and that's what we care in terms of like our goals. But then we're incentivizing people to say you can go through and build for better and then that minimum, and we're going to give you money for it. We're going to work with your permits for it. We're going to look at your taxes for it. There's a lot of different types of incentives that we could look at when you're trying to transform this. And so that's what we're doing with our project. We have until 2030 to have emission neutral buildings for all new buildings. And for us, it's start really slow and start ramping it up. And obviously, we're going to see a big change over the next 9 years, and hopefully start to level off again in 2030. But sometimes it's too quick. Sometimes it's too quick for industry, and we hear about we're not ready for that. So we're looking at mini projects of that push and pull at each like 3 to 4 or 5 year intervals to bring everybody up. Everybody's ready. Okay, let's do another step. Everybody got ready here again. Let's go up. And now like all those leaders keep on leading the whole way, but they're slowly kind of bringing everybody up with them. So it's not just like this really quick increase, which we did see in 2016, and people just weren't ready for it. And everybody gets really worried because the thing is going to cost a lot more. Supply chains aren't there. But this way you can really go through and advertise to suppliers, to your electrical companies, to your universities, to your consultants, like this is coming in 5 years. So let's all get ready for it. If you don't plan for it now, then obviously it's going to cost you more. But we're giving you the map of what we want to do. So it's not just we're making policies as we go. So that's kind of what we're looking at from our project. I'm keeping this pretty high level. I'm just being cognizant of time here. So some of the rebates and some of the incentives that we are doing to do a few things. One of the things we do in terms of the education piece and information piece is we use Google's Project Sunroof. Like I was saying, Edmonton has an immense solar potential. So we're able to go through, open this map and get an estimate of what the solar potential is for your house. And you can see kind of where like some of the hotspots are, where some areas where you wouldn't want to put the solar. So you take a look at this and get a general idea of like, can you be emission neutral just by going solar? Or like, this is the one piece of it. So what else do you need to do on top of that? The other piece that we look at is EnerGuide. So how do we rate our homes, put them on the map so you can show how well they are performing compared to others in your community. So similar to what we see in Europe when you're coming to the labeling of buildings. and almost kind of like Energy Star as well for houses, to understand like what a well-performing building looks like, and hopefully being able to change the citizens and the customer's mind to be looking for something like this the next time they go and purchase a home. And so we also provide funding for them to go through and do the model for this, which is around, I think, $500, Mark, if I'm correct on that. And provide funding so it's free for them to do it, to at least get the label. On the commercial end, again, building benchmarking, is going through and being able to show like how well those buildings are actually performing. So there's audit rebates, how we align with LEED and LEED EBOM. There's a lot of different ways of how we can start pushing that industry there, along with our climate leadership teams. This is some of the modeling we've done for our houses now for the project we're doing. So we're going through and modeling a bunch of different scenarios to push that market over. They look really boxy. They're an engineer's dream. But it's, so this is kind of our single family house. We do a row house. We're modeling larger commercial, or larger residential, larger commercial, and then our long malls, and seeing how much it costs to go through and do each one of these, and what do we do to push the market. So we hear like, what are the issues when you're trying to push this? One is our grid. So as you can see here, you know, natural gas is 49% of it. 43% is coal and coke, and we have hydro is very little, a little bit of wind, very little solar, little petroleum. So, you know, this obviously depends on like how we power our buildings. You go to places in other places in Canada that are almost fully hydro. It's a lot easier to go through and be carbon neutral. Cost. So cost is a big one that comes up all the time for us through our project, what we're looking at. I showed those different types of buildings. So we've costed what the 30-year payback looks like. We've costed what the capital cost is in different steps. So as we step to 2025, halfway point, when we get to 2030, what is it going to cost to get to emission neutral? Obviously, these change over the next 9 years. The supply chain changes. Things hopefully get cheaper as they're seeing that they need to have these. But you can see like high-rise commercial and low-rise commercial, we're kind of there already. And I think that's one of the great things to see is what else do we have to do just to get that additional bit. Training and skills, we've been hearing a lot about that. How do we go through and train our builders to make sure that they're able to build it, you know, and build it properly, so we don't get walls that are rotting, or we have poor drainage issues type things. I think that's one of the things that we are looking at working with our universities and tech schools. Citizens, how do we get citizens to buy into it? You know, I think it's one of those things where there's labeling, but there's also like, how do we go through and provide awareness of what that is, right? And I think this is one of the ones from British Columbia where, you know, your house is an appliance. So when you look at your appliance, like, would you just buy a run-of-the-mill dishwasher or oven or fridge here, or would you go through and get something that's more efficient? And I think a lot of people do look at that, getting something that's maybe just a little bit more efficient to reduce their energy costs. So the same way you would look at a house. And then we get into, after we look at those, it's our weather, right? And our weather, it gets pretty cold here. So I think this one was like on a -40 day where I had to go out and shovel some snow. And then the other one, I think, was -40 with the family out in Lake Louise, and it was pretty chilly. So what we have to design for here is extreme. And when we look at that at other places in Canada, it's a bit better. You know, you think of your Vancouvers, you think of your Torontos, where they have these really big markets and they're doing this amazing work when it comes to carbon emissions. They also don't have to deal with -40 or -52 with a wind chill. You know, so a lot of insulation, yes. Does a heat pump work at -50? No. Do you need backup for that? Yes. So there's a lot of things that we look at when it comes to this, and like, how is it that we address this along with, you know, with our grid, right? Because now you're talking about natural gas, and how much heat we actually need up here, and obviously it's inverse when we think about Central America, Latin America. Is a lot of time there we're looking. I think I I love Passive House, and I think of what Passive House looks like in hot, humid climates, and it's just like, it's backwards, and it's so fascinating to me in terms of how we would build something to reduce that demand. It really comes down to cooling, right? And I think a lot of those things are there already in terms of thermal mass that's built there, and the type of heat pumps and air conditioners that are used there as well. So yeah, so those are kind of the 4 things that we look for in this project that are holding us up. And that's kind of our project so far. I know I'm trying to talk a little bit fast here, but gracias.
Thanks to you, Juan and Mark. Excellent presentation. I just want to make 3 important remarks of your presentation. I think we always have the importance of having data to make decisions, and all these energy modeling softwares that there's available now to the municipality takes actions and plans. Next, the importance of having codes and regulation, especially incentives to promote green buildings to push the market. We think that's the difference. And having a goal, a common goal, and have all the teams working together to reach it, and having the same language. We think that's a key aspect to remark of your presentation. Si alguien del público tiene alguna pregunta para nuestros conferencistas, tenemos 1 minuto para que puedan responderlas. I don't know if you want to have a final comment, Mark.
Yeah, not too much more to say. I think that was a wrap up of key things in achieving our targets, whether that be on the building side or any other transportation, all of those types of things. It is. Yeah, it is extremely important, and we are always asked, again, on the data side of things, we're always asked for the numbers, whether they be modeling numbers, dollar numbers, where we're going. So yeah, a good wrap up, Pamela, on this.
Yes, no one can make decisions without having data, so we always insist in that part. Well, we don't have any questions from the audience, so we're going to move forward. Gracias a todos por acompañarnos. Si tienen alguna pregunta o algún comentario para nuestros speakers, en el listado de personas pueden hacer clic sobre ellos para poder mandar un mensaje directo o incluso invitarles a una videollamada privada. Ellos nos van a estar acompañando todavía unos minutos por acá, pero vamos a continuar con nuestra agenda. Nosotros tenemos un día todavía completo de charlas y los invitamos a que puedan accesar a la parte de sesiones y elegir la sesión de su interés. Tenemos todavía temas específicamente de incentivos municipales que se están dando para construcción sostenible a lo largo de la región de las Américas. Tenemos también una presentación sobre Lead for Cities and Communities. Tenemos todavía mucho que compartir con ustedes el resto del día. Y nos volvemos a ver en este escenario para nuestra plenaria de cierre, donde nos estará acompañando el gerente de sostenibilidad de Foster & Partners. Así que no se lo pierdan y nos vemos en este espacio. Thank you, Mark and Juan, again, for your experience and your sharing for today. Thank you very much. We hope to see you soon here in Guatemala.